Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're setting the stage for a highly structured deep dive into a topic that, honestly, rarely makes the front page. Yet, it fundamentally shapes the world we actually live in. We're looking at the hidden dimensions of global occupations. Specifically, we're going to explore the geopolitics of survival, what actually happens to natural resources when they are under occupation.
I want you to stop for a second and just to ask yourself a really fundamental question. One that kind of bridges the gap between our comfortable everyday reality and the incredibly harsh reality faced by millions of people. What if someone else completely controlled the water you drink, the land you farm, and the natural resources right beneath your feet? Imagine living on your own land, the home you've literally always known, but suddenly you need official permission just to access your own well. Crazy, right?
Because, as we're going to see today, the control of these vital assets, it goes way beyond mere lines on a map or physical geography. When we talk about these resources, we are fundamentally talking about power, the stark reality of daily survival, and basic human rights.
Okay, so here is our agenda for today. First, we'll look at the hidden battle. Then, water as the essence of life, followed by land being more than just property. After that, we'll get into the economics of natural resources, measuring the actual human cost, and finally, the international legal framework. Let's dive right in. Section 1. The hidden battle, beyond military control. Throughout history, whenever territories are occupied, they obviously become battlegrounds. But it's not just about military dominance. They become these fiercely contested arenas for the absolute most essential, life-sustaining resources you can imagine. Think of this as three specific pillars. First, land. That determines exactly where people are allowed to live. Then, water. That dictates whether a community can even survive at all. And finally, natural resources, which completely shape a region's economic independence. Honestly, if you control these three pillars, you completely control the territory.
Section 2. Water, the essence of life, regulating humanity's basic need.
We really have to understand that water isn't just some commodity to be traded or managed, right? It is life itself. It's absolutely vital for drinking, farming, basic sanitation, and keeping healthcare systems running. But in many occupied territories around the globe, access to groundwater, rivers, and reservoirs is heavily regulated. Local communities face these massive, mounting hurdles just to maintain their basic infrastructure. We're talking strict restrictions on drilling new wells, repairing already damaged pipes, or even just expanding basic irrigation systems so they can grow their crops. So what does this all mean? The crucial takeaway here is that these mounting regulations aren't just a logistical headache. Ultimately, they create this stark systemic inequality when it comes to a fundamental requirement for human survival. It essentially becomes a system where humanity's absolute most basic need is deeply unequal.
Section 3. Land. More than property, the dual value of territory.
Now, let's shift our focus to land, which has a dual value that goes way beyond just being a physical space to exist upon. Land presents this really powerful dichotomy. On the physical side, it's an engine for livelihood. It provides crops, income, inheritances, schools, and homes. But then you have the intangible side, right? It acts as an anchor for cultural identity. It holds memories, culture, identity, and a deep sense of belonging that spans generations. You literally cannot put a price on that intangible value.
But how is this land actually controlled in practice? Well, it becomes restricted through a few key mechanisms. Think security zones, new settlements, checkpoints, and designated military areas. When land gets confiscated or becomes inaccessible through these means, the local populations suffer this massive double blow. They lose their physical income, and at the exact same time, they lose that profound sense of belonging we just talked about.
Section 4. Economics of natural resources, the wealth beneath the ground.
Okay, we also need to shift our focus downward, looking at the overarching economic power of what lies beneath the earth. Consider this subsurface and, honestly, sometimes surface-level wealth. We're talking about minerals, stone, oil, natural gas, and forests. In occupied territories, these highly valuable resources are frequently heavily monitored, controlled, or extracted right under the purview of the occupying authorities. Basically, whoever controls these assets effectively holds the economic keys to the entire territory.
And this brings us to a really complex legal threshold: lawful administration versus unlawful exploitation. International humanitarian law dictates that an occupying power shouldn't exploit a territory's resources solely for its own benefit while totally disregarding the protected population. But here's the thing, the line between those two concepts is incredibly thin. It represents one of the most fiercely contested issues in international law today. When exactly does administration cross the line into exploitation? It's a subject of constant, intense global debate.
Section 5. Measuring the human cost beyond the policies.
To truly wrap our heads around this, we have to measure the human cost beyond the macro policies. We need to zoom in. Behind every single policy we've discussed, there are real people living through these realities every single day. I want you to try and visualize this grueling reality. Imagine children acting as the primary water carriers for their entire families. Because local wells are restricted or totally inaccessible, these kids are forced to walk for miles carrying heavy water containers just so their families have something to drink.
Or think about the deep despair of farmers and agricultural workers. Imagine standing there and watching multi-generational orchards, trees that your own grandparents actually planted and tended to, just drying up and dying right in front of you. And why? Simply because you aren't permitted the irrigation needed to save them. And then, of course, there's the paralyzing uncertainty faced by families who can't even build homes because their building permits are continually denied. Entire communities are left completely in the dark, not knowing if they'll even be allowed to remain on the very land their ancestors cultivated. These aren't just, abstract political talking points. They are profound, lasting human stories.
Section 6. The International Legal Framework. The Rules of Occupation.
So how on earth does the international community attempt to govern these incredibly complex scenarios? Let's zoom back out to the macro level. At the very center of all this is international humanitarian law. This framework includes key treaties like the Fourth Geneva Convention and the Hague Regulations, which are essentially global agreements designed to protect people in conflict zones. Together, they clearly set out the primary legal framework and the strict obligations for occupying powers. This is the absolute baseline for assessing conduct in any occupied territory, anywhere in the world.
The core legal principles established by bodies like the International Committee of the Red Cross are actually quite specific. They require the protection of civilians, respect for private property, though, yes, there are certain legal exceptions, and the strict administration of public resources in accordance with international law rather than just serving the occupier's own domestic interests.
But, and this is a big but, the interpretation and application of these rules are highly, highly disputed. While these laws exist very clearly on paper, their real-world application in any particular conflict is fiercely contested by literally all sides involved. The legal framework acts as a guide, sure, but the reality on the ground is usually this massive web of competing interpretations and claims.
To bring it all together, occupation is ultimately measured by who controls the water, the land, and the resources. The simple reality is that when access to life's basic essentials becomes unequal, the consequences reach into every single home, they affect every single farm, and they fundamentally shape the future of millions of people.
So, I want to end our explainer today by leaving you with a memorable, maybe even a bit provocative question to reflect on. Should access to water and natural resources be protected regardless of political conflict? It's an absolutely critical question about the very stakes of global survival. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this complex deep dive. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so definitely share them. Keep learning.